So our next presenter is Father Taylor Reynolds. His parish is about 2 hours north of here. I might be there next weekend, by the way. Father Taylor has an interesting role in the chantry. So he not only serves as pastor of a parish, but he also has his canonical law degree, right? So he serves in our tribunal. And we're starting that OCIA process, right? And so where we start interviewing adults, or sometimes kids, but mostly adults who have prior marriages are just not regulated, and this is a confusing topic. I have the luxury working at the chantry where I could just walk down the hallway and say, hey, I got a question. I got this situation, right? Genesis of Eve conference was last weekend. And we had a diocesan table, and we put some, if you're needing an annulment, kind of brochures, and Father Taylor has some right here too. I think somewhere's up top here. Divorce and annulments is something we printed from the diocese a couple of years ago, and actually just stayed in a box for many years. And so we started like handing these out, because you'd be surprised of the marriages that are not canonically in line with the church. Say that nicely. And I cannot tell you, I probably had about 5 or 6 ladies at the Genesis of Eve conference approach me wanting help for their annulments. Right? I love that part of the OCIA process. If you need a marriage regulation, call me. Call Chad. I'm sure he'd be glad to help you. Or Kenny. Well, maybe not Kenny. I don't know. No, I'm just messing, Kenny. But it's important, right? Father Taylor's, he has taken this diagram. You should all have a copy on your table. If you need more copies, let me know. And he's going to walk through this process, right? And at first I had put this as a breakout, because I'm like, what does a second grade teacher need to know about the tribunal process? Because that second grade's parents might need something with the tribunal process, right? And that was through Bishop Marshall's wisdom, not mine. So I introduced to you Father Taylor. And he's going to take all of his time, probably more. I might have to shut him down a little bit, but I thank him for his work in the tribunal. Thank you, Father Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everyone hear me with this thing? This is okay, kind of weird. All right. Yeah. So, whoops, I just messed that up somehow. Okay, yeah, back. So I'm glad I'm able to be here with y'all. Yeah, when I first was coming here this morning, I was like, oh man, I'm talking to a bunch of like 2nd grade, 3rd grade teachers about annulments and everything like that. But yes, there's so many times where y'all are probably going to be the first people that are going to encounter parents who bring their kids to catechism, but they themselves can't receive communion because the marriage is not blessed. Or, they see their little kid starting to advance in the faith, and they're like, I want to do this, a lot of stuff. And so I think it's very important that first you understand this whole process kind of can even just diffuse fears and everything, but also help walk people through this process. So first I want to walk through and just kind of talk about this place we call the tribunal and everything like that. So what is the tribunal and why does it matter for Christian education? Let's go, first of all, what Jesus said, his words to St. Peter. I give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is loose in heaven. Jesus gives keys of authority. He gives to them the very words of saying, when you say and do something, I honor it. I respect it. Basically, in the church, we look at this, and if you've heard of these terms, we have what's called like the munus docendi, munus sanctificandi, munus regendi. Maybe you haven't heard of this. Basically, in the church has power to teach, to sanctify, and to govern. Okay, these are the 3 main functions of the church. And if this is rudimentary for you, this is kind of where we're hoping to get the plane, to put its wheels on the ground. The church teaches, the church sanctifies, the church governs. And all 3 of those go together. Okay? These aren't necessarily kind of sporadic, but we even see this in the life of Jesus. As he preaches and teaches, he drives out demons. As he heals people, then they're brought back to life. And all these things are connected. To teach people is in a certain way to sanctify them. To sanctify them is to ultimately lead them to our true home. So this is the first thing the church is called to do. Second thing, we have to look at what the church is also. The church isn't, a bundle of ideals. The church is not just kind of a social group. The church, at the end of the day, it is a Christian community. Okay? What that means is on earth, again, we talk about church triumphant, church militant, the visible and invisible church. The visible church is a visible community, right? We have a visible community. We have visible bonds, relationships, and those have to be understood and respected. And so with that, there are certain bonds we form, certain entitlements we have, certain things that kind of bind us together in this community, okay? So the church needs to be able to uphold that, define that, and enforce those things. Because as a society, we create laws, and laws, I think have a very scary term in today's times. Laws, it's just cracking down on bad things, and that's like, law and order and all this, bad stuff. But no, laws are meant to do nothing more than define what is right and just in the world. It just makes explicit what is your right. What do you have an entitlement to? It's enforced by someone who has the power. Again, the church been given that power by Jesus. Say, what are you entitled to? What does all the Christian people have entitled to? That is the first thing. And the next thing we look at is the sacraments, okay? The sacraments, they actually create the laws in the church. I know that's probably startling for you, but look at it this way, okay? When God gives His mercy, when we talk about God is merciful, God gives grace, God gives new life, all those are very intangible things, right? It's very intangible when you talk about God's grace, God's mercy, God's new life. All that stuff's intangible, except in the instance of the sacraments. The sacraments make tangible the intangible of God. Okay? When you take the Eucharist, you are physically receiving the life of God. When, again, what we proclaim, when that baptism water hits you, you are receiving the mercy and the new life of God. When you audibly hear those words, I absolve you of your sins, you're receiving the mercy of God. These sacraments make those things that seem so intangible real for us. By that same token, they make it something that we can be entitled to. Okay, I don't use the entitled in kind of the bad sense, but what I mean is in the true sense, the original sense, this is something that God has destined for you to have. Okay, God poured out His blood on the cross for you, meaning you are entitled to His mercy, to His grace, to His new life. Okay? And so the sacraments, they make that real. And so what we say is ultimately what God has freely given, what God in His mercy has freely given to all His people, He's placed in the hands of the church. Say, this is your job. So what God gave freely is now a due of justice for the church. That we're not being charitable whenever we baptize people, whenever we hear confessions, whenever we give it. No, we're not being charitable. We are being just. And by God, if we, especially priests, do not do that, we are being unjust. We are being unjust if we do not give what God has freely entitled to His people. That's the responsibility of the church, is to give in a due of justice, the obligation to give what God has freely given to His church. So, that's kind of a little overview. So within the church, within this society, just like a human society, we have a legislative, we have an executive, we have a judicial branch. Okay? The tribunal is the judicial branch of the church. It judges, it guards, and it defines the rights of the people in the sacraments. Okay? Just like in, again, our society, what does the judicial branch do? It steps in to sort of be that impartial but authority that can make a true judgment and make what is right, and kind of have almost an authority over some of the law to sort of declare whenever a law has been sort of abused or something like that. So the tribunal is the judicial branch of the church. It is what gives to the church that ability to say, hey, I need some judgment. There maybe is a wrong, there's maybe something that needs to be looked at. Can the church step in and look at that? And this goes over a broad range of things. Sacraments, if there's ever been something that's an abuse or something that's happened in the church, that's us. Even, in the good sense, one thing I've been blessed to do is to look at like a canonization. Canonization is nothing more than the church making a judgment. Is this person's life truly heroic to the point that all people can look at them and say that person is holy, is in heaven? So, okay. Tied with that, this is one of my favorite canons. I have this in my office. Luke 15, verse 7. There is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 just who do not need repentance. I think so much in the church, we get to do all the fun stuff and the good things. The tribunal deals, like I said, whenever there is something wrong, something bad that happens, and okay, who's going to be the bad guy to step in and do this? Okay, it's a lot of times going to be us. But you know what? There's rejoicing in that, because to help that one person who is wronged, to bring that person who abused the church, bring them back in, it's worth it all. Because one of the things the church does a lot of is, it's kind of a twofold thing, is that yes, we have to defend all the sacraments, we have to defend the universal rights of the church, but we also have to make sure that every human soul is being guided to heaven. That even if someone has done the most heinous crimes, has done the most wrong, that yes, sometimes the church has to step in and say, boom, okay, we are reprimanding you, we're making reparations for that. We still have to say, how are we guiding that person's soul to heaven? How are we guiding that soul to heaven? Because that's not what you would see in the civil society. No, the civil society just says, you broke a law, here's the retribution. Bam. They don't care about the personal soul, the person's conscience. We do. That's our obligation. And that's Canon 1752. That's the last canon in the entire canon law, but it's probably the most beautiful. Always observing canonical equality and keeping in mind the salvation of souls, which in the church must always be the supreme law. Salvation of souls, it's the most supreme law in the church. Like I said, that's not a scary thing. That is, like I said, that's that obligation that we hold to in the church. I've listed a few canons that are just very pertinent. They're kind of beautiful, just kind of for us to sort of hear, what are some of these canons and what do they maybe mean for us? So this is under the section of the teaching office of the church. It says, it is the obligation and inherent right of the church, independent of any human authority, to preach the gospel to all people, using for this purpose even its own means of social communication. For it is to the church that Christ the Lord entrusted the deposit of faith, so that by the assistance of the Holy Spirit it might consciously guard revealed truths, more intimately penetrated, and faithfully proclaim and expounded. Didn't think you'd be hearing that from a canon lawyer, did you? That's beautiful stuff. The church has so many beautiful things. I won't go through all the canons, but there's some of them that are just very beautiful, very powerful. Talking about baptism. Okay, one of the canons says that every person who is not baptized has a right to be baptized. Okay, every person has a right to be baptized. Again, because what is it? That's God's gift of new life. Every person has a right to that. Every single person, it says, and this again, they're listed up there, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it says, every single person has the right to have the Word of God proclaimed to them. I tell people that all the time of do we proclaim the Word of God to those people down the street that aren't Catholic? They have a right to have the Word of God proclaimed to them. And the church, in her own law, says that's the truth. We have to do that. We have to uphold that. Even things like one of the ones I like to cite a lot. It says that when we look at a penal law means like a law that's kind of like would bring a penalty to it. It says those laws must be interpreted very strictly, but laws that deal with giving blessings are interpreted more liberally. Put it simply, when the church is looking at, okay, did a sacrament happen? That happens all the time. Like people say, oh, Father, I was at this Mass, and the priest, he got up there and he said, blah, 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 and I think he messed up the words of consecration. Or I was in confession, and this priest said, da, da, da. Did my sins actually get forgiven? Well, what the church says is, any time we're looking at a law or anything that's giving a blessing, the church is more liberal in its interpretation. Basically, if there's anywhere we can say we think that it happened, it did happen. But on the other side, when we look at like more kind of penal things, people say, Father, I think I committed this sin. I think I did this. I think I broke this. We always say, okay, in those cases, we're incredibly strict and incredibly, legalistic. If there's any chance this person didn't break that, then we say they didn't break it. Okay, so that's what the church looks at. When we look at giving blessings, we try to see how is the most generous way the church can interpret this, because the church wants to be so generous in giving out her blessings. But in these kind of, more penal things, the church is much more, again, strict in her interpretation. Just so you kind of know, like, the church isn't out there to try and, like, find any way that we can, stick it to you, penalize you. No, we're actually the opposite. If we look at a situation like, is there any chance that a sacrament happened? Yes, we say the sacrament happened. If there's any way we say that someone broke a law, we say, okay, we have to look at every single thing and make sure they hit every single one of those I's, dot every one of those I's, cross every one of those T's. We have to look at that when it looks at those penal things. So that's going to come up in a second, a little more. So OCIA and the tribunal. Okay, so the tribunal understands the laws and the rights and the bonds that exist in and around the sacraments, and how they create goods that are entitled to be given, protected, and even restituted when damaged. Okay, so basically, we understand the sacraments, we understand the bonds that are formed, we understand the damages that can happen, we understand all that, and sometimes we have to step in and make those judgments. Okay? Particularly with sacraments that are more public and form additional bonds with the church community, such as the priesthood and marriage, the tribunal has a power to judge and defend. Okay, so, and I won't get into all this because it'd be a whole separate topic, but like when we talk about something like, in confession, the church actually has an entire forum, the internal forum, that's like, these are things that are not privy to the society, but the church can look into that and say, okay, how was maybe everything done rightly? But there's lots of sacraments that do form very public images and public things that are very public goods. Marriage. That's why I tell people, is like, when they get married, like, remember, your marriage is not a private reality. It's public. You're a public good of the church. You're forming the church. So, by that same token, the church has things to look at with that. Here's another one, this bottom one. This is very important, and it kind of goes back to what I was just saying before. Sacraments enjoy the favor of the law. So until proven differently, the church presumes and defends the validity and effectivity of a sacrament. That's what I was just saying before. Okay, so if we're asking, did a sacrament actually happen? When in doubt, the church always rules on the side of the sacrament happened. There is a sacrament there. Okay? Until, like we said, we can find in every category, at least, that it didn't happen. So this is a very important thing. Sacraments enjoy the favor of the law, which is great. The church wants to defend the sacraments. We want to put, first and foremost, the thing we're looking at are the sacraments. They have pride of place. Because we don't want to, again, live in this society where we're saying, oh, well, maybe I didn't get the sacrament because I was not absolutely perfect. It's like, no. We believe that we're not perfect. That's why we're in the church. And that's why the sacraments are on the side of being more generously given. So the church defends that the sacraments have the favor of law. That's then, though, going to come in to play with a little more of what does the tribunal look at. If that's what we hold that in the good sense, but we hold it in every sense as well. So marriage. Marriage, like I said, it's going to hold the presumption of the law. So if two people contracted a marriage, the presumption of the law is what? Come on, help me out here. They're married. Yes, thank you. Okay, y'all are getting this. Okay, so a man and a woman stood in front of a priest, whatever. They said vows. Okay, looks like a marriage happened. If it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's got to be a duck. And if it looks like a marriage, walks like a marriage, it's got to be a marriage. That's what we hold to. Okay. Also, this is going to come into play too. Marriage is a natural sacrament, a natural sign. And it's tied also with that next part, indissoluble from God's creation. What this means is, of all the 7 sacraments, marriage is the only sacrament Jesus did not institute. Okay? Use this in your catechism classes. It's the only sacrament Jesus did not institute. He elevated it. It already existed. From the beginning of time, God established that a man would leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. from the beginning. This is a natural reality. This is something that we ultimately would say that people themselves also have a natural right to do. You know, I think so many people, and this comes up, and it's saddening, so many people say, oh, so-and-so, you know, they didn't really know what they were doing. They couldn't really get... It's like, people naturally know how to get married. It's one of the most basic things in humanity, that we were made to marry. We were made to know how to make that gift, know how to make that. We've had people with Down syndrome get married because we proclaim, again, in that beautiful way, that even them, if they know just those very basics, the subtleness of marriage, they can marry. They have that right. People have the right to marry naturally. Okay, naturally. This is something that the church didn't invent. This is not something that, again, was, you know, put in by any other human institution. God Himself put this within our hearts. And same thing, from the beginning, from that moment, God made that marriage would be indissoluble. What God has joined together, man must not tear asunder. I won't go into the whole theology of marriage, but you know, that's the thing, is that by the nature of what marriage happens, when two become one flesh, you can't make, you know, that one two again. You can only make them a broken one. You know, the image of you know, the child. You know, I use that a lot. The child is that image of the natural sacrament of marriage, because what is it? It literally is that one flesh. Those two have become one. I mean, the very DNA is wedded together. And just like you can't just rip that child apart, you know, and make it into two people again, you can't do that with the marriage either. So, you know, this is one of those things we look at. Baptism. So one of the things we do recognize that in Jesus giving baptism, He has elevated marriage. So like I said, marriage has been elevated to the level of a sacrament. So now, not only is it a natural sacrament, it's a supernatural sacrament. When you get married, you are representing God's love for His people. Catholics are bound. One of the things we say, they're bound to be married in the church. So what this means, as an analogy, I'll use actually a couple analogies, but when we talk about the third commandment, how do Catholics fulfill the third commandment? Y'all know what the third commandment is, right? We're in trouble if catechists don't know the third commandment. Say it out loud, come on.
Keep
holy the Sabbath day. Okay, how do Catholics keep holy the Sabbath day? How do they keep holy the Lord's Day? Go to Mass. Specifically, we go to Mass, right? Okay, was that mentioned in Scripture? Catholics must go to Mass. You know, the little addendum to the third commandment. You know, on the tablets. You know, God throws another. Whoops, I forgot about this one. No. That is the church saying for our members that we say how we interpret this third commandment is you go to Mass. That is how it happens. That is an ecclesial law. You know, that's an ecclesial law. The church said that, okay, someone must go to Mass on Sunday, which is also why we've seen that, like during COVID, bishops dispensed people from attending Mass to fulfill the Sunday obligation. They didn't dispense them from still keeping holy the Sabbath day. They dispensed them from going to Mass publicly to fulfill their Sunday obligation. Because the church has that ability to do that over her members. Same thing, if you're ever going on a trip and you think you maybe, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it to Mass, you can always ask your pastor to be dispensed, maybe not always, you can ask your pastor to get dispensed from that obligation to attend Mass on Sunday. Okay? So that's one of the things that can happen because that's a church law. Same thing with like the fasting before receiving communion. You can ask to be dispensed. If you, whoopsies, I drank coffee and had sugar in it, blah, 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 you can ask the priest to dispense you. Because those are ecclesial laws. So one of the things we say is that the church now interprets that how someone gets married as Catholics, that we bind them to say they are married in the church using the correct form. Using the form of having a priest there, exchanging vows that the church has laid out, yada, yada, all those things. So that's something that we say the church puts also an invalidating clause on it. I'm going to cover that a little later. Basically meaning, if people do not do that, if two Catholics, or even the one Catholic, does not do that, then the church has the ability to say that marriage is not valid. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that we're saying, okay, well, are you saying the church is now overriding God's law? No. Here's the image, and I'm going to refer back to it. So imagine you've got like a wine glass, okay? This wine glass is going to be filled with two separate bottles of wine. The husbands and the wives, okay? They pour it in. Well, naturally what happens, they pour that wine, there are two bottles of wine, and what happens? They mix, and essentially they form this one glass of wine that is basically unable to be separated. Well, the church has the ability to say that if they're not doing that within the church according to the form, the church can actually slip this little divider in that wine glass. So when their 2 bottles of wine are poured, what happens? That mixing does not happen. Doesn't mean that, again, the act of the pouring, doesn't mean the going in the glass didn't happen. It means that fullness of that mingling did not take place. Okay? I'm going to refer back to that image and that kind of principle in a little bit. So, what are some of the things that people need help with according to their marriages? So, first is marriage preparation. Okay? And hopefully, especially if you are teaching high schoolers, in some way, you're incorporating some kind of vocational reality, whether even encouraging them to talk about priesthood or marriage, and talk about marriage as a vocation. And it's never too early, I think, to talk about that. But specific marriage preparation, and I won't get all the way into this, is when someone has that intention to be married. And the churches have, again, and every diocese has different standards of, a 6-month preparation period. They need to do this, meet with these, all those kinds of things. So it's kind of like we said with any other sacrament. Every sacrament needs to have an adequate time of preparation. Okay? So that's the first thing, is preparing people who want to get married. Okay? Marriage counseling. Okay? And this covers so many things, all kind of stuff. This can be, Susie, who comes in and just really, really needs to talk to someone because, her husband he's hunting all the time, and she never sees him, and she just needs someone to talk to. Yeah, you need to talk about that. Yeah, bless you, sorry. I can do that too. Not because I'm in the tribunal, but sorry. I get sidetracked sometimes. But, you might also have, these 2 couples, they're struggling. They've been married for so long, they're struggles. They need some together counseling. Okay, that's another thing. I'm not getting into that, but that's just another service that maybe is offered, maybe would happen and should be happening in the parish. Okay, big scary word, convalidation. Okay, long and the short, when a lot of people come and they say this famous word, they say, Father, I want to get my marriage blessed. Okay, that is the most ambiguous word ever. And actually, I'm very thankful. I'm sure y'all heard about 2 years ago, the Pope put out a document on, getting marriages, the marriage blessed and stuff. And it brought up all kind of controversy and stuff like that. But one of the things it did, which was really great, was it said, look, getting a blessing has no bearing on your marriage status. Okay? That's one of the things. So we don't actually really talk about, I get my marriage blessed, and that does anything. What we really mean is one of 2 things. The first, primarily, is convalidation. Okay, it's a big word, but essentially what it means is there was some gap, something missing. Whether it was maybe in their personal intentions, maybe it was kind of like I said in that, they didn't do the right steps, where they got married. Something needs to happen to get them back in line with the church. Convalidation is the sort of like the church's first and foremost way of what needs to be done. Because, first of all, it ensures that they have given true, full, complete vows to marriage. Okay? Committing to all the things that marriage needs. But also, it will take care of anything else. If there was first time they got married, that they were not in the church or anything like that, it covers everything. Okay? And this is the most kind of the one we want to go with as much as possible. But there's some cases where we wouldn't. But what it entails is there's a profession of vows, fresh and new, as if they were never given. Okay? Because this is sometimes what we run into a lot of, is, they got married, on the beach and, I don't know, or in Las Vegas by Elvis or whatever. And now they just, to make mom and dad happy, they want to come into the church and get their little blessing. All right, I'm good, right? But in their head, I got married by Elvis in Las Vegas. That's my marriage, right? That's what they're holding in their head. No, we can't do that. It's not what you can do. We have to let them know that was bad. That was wrong. We don't use those words, by the way. But that wasn't how it should have happened. We need to reprofess vow. Like, you need to press your vows. Like, this is your marriage. The day you come and get your marriage convalidated, that is your marriage. Okay? Not thinking about Elvis. You got to forget Elvis. Okay? I'm sorry. If you're Elvis fans out there, I'm sorry I'm breaking on, but he's not a good minister of marriage. But, you know, you got to forget that. You have to completely give fresh vows. Okay? And I'm trying to not go too long because I have a lot to get over. The second thing, and this is kind of the next step the church can go with, it's called a sonation. This is sort of, again, a kind of a slap in the face word. Long and the short, go back to that wine glass image I used, remember? Okay, who put that little divider in there? Yeah, say it. Go ahead and say it. Don't be afraid. The church. The church. We put it in there. So who can take it out? The church. Okay. A sonation, and we literally call it a retroactive or a sonation in radice, which means going back to that beginning. It's literally the church in retrospect going in and removing that little divider. What happens when you remove that divider with those the two things of wine? What happens? They just automatically mix. Okay. A sonation is when the only thing that's invalidating their marriage is that there was at least one Catholic who wasn't married in the church. And okay, that's the only thing. That's the only thing. Okay, well then we can pull that out, and everything's good. Sonations are what I say sonations are best for is when you have this couple where yes, they got married civilly years and years ago. Now they're married, they have kids, and it would be like the kids would be very startled to see mom and dad going in church, repressing vows, and thinking, well, what happened the past 15 years of my life? Have they been married? Whatever. Like this, like a sonation can be good in that sense because you don't have to reprofess vows. But in the same token, if in any way someone comes and needs to get their marriage blessed, and there's any hint that when they first gave the vows, maybe they didn't intend children, maybe they, didn't intend to have whatever. There was some kind of lack of an essential element. The sonation does not cover that. Okay? Sonation does not cover that. It cannot supplant that. That's why a convalidation gets everything. A sonation only removes that invalidating fact that they were not married in the church. So those are two things. Now, a convalidation can be handled in the parish. So you and your pastor maybe can help people work through that and everything. A sonation has to be done in the tribunal, but it's normally just paperwork. It's just filling out the paperwork, getting marriage license stuff, sending it to the tribunal, and they can, again, give that decree of a sonation. All right, here we go. Annulment. All right, this is also reserved to the tribunal. Okay, so where do we begin? The annulments. This, and I'll get through everything else. But basically, first of all, they're reserved to the tribunal. So this is something that has to come from the tribunal because what we said earlier, presumption of the law, their marriage is valid. Second of all, this is a public good. So this is not just something that, okay, well, they can decide, you know what, that past marriage I had, I really didn't love him, so it wasn't real. So, because love makes all things real, right? Whatever those, fairy tale things they talk about and everything. I'm sorry if I'm crushing like y'all's like rom-com like things y'all like to listen to or whatever. But the annulment, it's excuse me. What we're saying is, okay, there's some previous marriage, and until proven otherwise, that marriage has to be treated like a marriage. Okay, so that has to be examined by the church because it's a public good, public things happening, yada yada. So why are these reserved? Because again, they need a judicial decision on otherwise presumed matters. So sacraments are presumed. This is a public matter. So until proven otherwise, the presumption is always going to be that marriage happened. Okay. So, all right. I put this little chart on here. Let's see if we can dive into this with some funsies way. And if y'all have any more questions with this, we can go through. But basically, so, all right. People come to you. Maybe it's parents. Maybe it's people in RCIA. Sorry, I still call it RCIA. Forgive me for that. Whatever. They're coming in some way. They're like, hey, I want to come into the church. I want to get back involved in church. Whatever. All right. So putting on my glasses now. The first question, are they married? Okay, just this person who's sitting here in front of you, ask that question, are they married? All right, so if no, they're not married, do they want to be married? If no, okay, well then great. They're looking at single life or a different vocation, something like that. Okay, but if they are currently not married but they want to get married, then the question is, okay, do they want to get married to a Catholic, presumably? If they want to get married to a Catholic, it needs to be married in the church. And if they're not, if it is married, they are married to a Catholic in the church, it's presumed to be valid. Okay, we presume a Catholic being married in the church is valid. Okay, if they are marrying a Catholic not in the church, then it's what we call lack of form. That's that little divider that goes in there and everything. So if they are not marrying a Catholic, that's what we call a mixed marriage. And what that means is one person's Catholic, one person's not. They need to fill out a form saying, okay, I'm a Catholic. I am, wanting to get married to this person, and they're not Catholic, but I declare I'm going to stay Catholic and everything. So that just needs a marriage preparation process and everything. Okay, but if they're going to be married to a Catholic, and then maybe they weren't married in the church, that's a lack of form. Zoom, we shoot that over to marriage prep. They still need a marriage prep, and it needs either to be convalidated or senated. Okay, so is that kind of clear? I'm gonna touch on this once I hit everything, so it might make a little bit better sense once I hit everything. So, are they married? Yes, but also at the same time, if they want to be married, and you need to look at their spouse, the question then always is, okay, if they are married or if they want to be married, we've got to look at their spouse. The question we have to ask is, have they or have their intended spouse ever been married before? Have they ever been married before? Okay, so if their spouse has not, I gotta make it clear in my mind. Okay, if they have not been married before, or if they are married, if they have not been married before, okay, then again we go to, is their spouse, the one they want to get married to, or is their spouse Catholic? Okay, if their spouse is Catholic, then we go again to looking at, is it married in the church? And this is the big thing, if they're not Catholic, if their spouse is not Catholic, the marriage is presumed valid because marriage is a natural sacrament. So, two Buddhists that get married, we presume that their marriage is as valid as two Catholics. Okay, now that sounds kind of odd. Two Protestants, two Episcopalians, two whatever. If they get married, because marriage is a natural sacrament, we have that presumption that it is valid. Okay, so if they are not Catholic, because marriage is a natural sacrament, we presume their marriage is valid. Okay? And that's going to play a lot, because you're going to have a lot of these people who are going to come and say, well, hey, me and my spouse, we want to get married. He's not Catholic though, but he was married before. Why does he need an annulment? That happens so often. Well, because we didn't make marriage indissoluble. God did. So if he got married, it's presumed valid because, okay, like I said, if it's a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, soon to be a duck, okay? They got married, ergo we presume that it's invalid. Or it's not invalid, sorry, it's indissoluble. So we presume that on people who are not Catholic. And then like I said, if they are Catholic and if they're married in the church, that's presumed valid, okay? If it's a Catholic and they're not married in the church, or even if it's one Catholic not married in the church, then we know that wasn't valid because Catholics have this obligation to marry in the church. So, have they been married before? Yes. Was one person Catholic? That's why I say yes. If there was in the church, or if that's when we say if it's in the church. If there was not in the church, that's a lack of form. Okay. If they were married in the church, that's presumed valid. Okay. Anything that's presumed valid needs to go through an annulment process. If there's that previous marriage that in any way is presumed valid, it needs an annulment. Because, I'm going to get into it a little bit. But is this kind of making sense? Yes. Okay. It's okay if it doesn't, because like I said, it's kind of confusing. But you can just kind of sit and chew through this chart. That's why I printed it out, so you can kind of just keep it and kind of gnaw on it a little bit. But those are some of the basic things that you're just kind of dealing with. You know, when you got Catholic and Catholic, you always got to say, were they married in the church? Catholic, one Catholic, one not Catholic. Still ask, were they married in the church, or did they get a dispensation? Because they can ask for a dispensation. That's kind of another thing, but I tried not to take too much time with all of this. If there is two people who are not Catholic, they're not bound to canonical form. But they are, again, still people who have that natural right to marry. So we presume that if they married, that if they said vows, if there was witnesses, if there was any of that, we presume that that was valid. Okay, when in doubt, sacraments happen. This is the flip side of that beautiful right that we do uphold. So now we have to hold it on all circumstances, not just, okay, well, we like proclaiming that whenever, yay, I like talking about my marriage, and yeah, maybe no, we got to look at it now. Even when this couple, they want to get back in the church, but former spouse was married before. Okay, well, we've got to declare this truth for that as well. Truth is truth. It applies in every situation. It doesn't just apply when we like it. By the way, I put a little thing in there. This should be obvious, but if the spouse died, there's no more bond. Okay, marriage is until death. So if so-and-so had a previous marriage, but the former spouse has passed away, they are free from that. Okay, they're free from that bond. Trying to make sure I got everything. So yes, once they get an annulment, then the next thing is, okay, are they currently married? Because after an annulment of a previous marriage is declared, then you got to still look at the current marriage. Okay, because what happened is that marriage they're in right now, it can't be done correctly if they had a previous bond. That's one thing. You can't be free to marry if you have a previous bond. So that's why someone who has a presumed valid previous marriage, why technically the current marriage they're in can't get convalidated, blessed, whatever, right now. So if they are currently married, after they've been through the annulment process, they need their current marriage to be either convalidated or senated. If they are not currently married, if they just had a previous marriage, they want to marry, well then at that point they're free to marry. Okay, does that make sense? Is all that pretty clear as mud? Okay. Okay. So what are the proper steps? Okay, so this is just kind of like the pedagogy of, like I said, you got people coming in, various stages. Maybe they're coming in for OCIA. Maybe they're coming in because, hey, I've been away from the church, I want to come back. What are the steps? Okay, so first of all, marriages should be regularized before receiving baptism or any reception in the church. Okay, because marriage is such a public good and a public reality, that's the first thing that needs to happen, is that their marriage needs to be sort of recognized. Now, here's the thing, is if two people, and this comes up a lot too, if two Protestants, they were validly married beforehand, and they want to become Catholic, you don't have to get their marriage blessed. Why? What did we just say before? Because they were already married. They weren't bound to canonical form when they were Protestants. And so we can't come in and just say, okay, well, now that you're Catholic, bam, now you're like, no, because that marriage is indissoluble. That would be like going back and dissolving the marriage and then putting that bond in there and saying, haha, got you on that one. No, we say that y'all were married as Protestants. That marriage is presumed valid. It is indissoluble. Ergo, when you become Catholic, the marriage is like naturally sort of brought in. It's naturally elevated and everything. So that's something to keep in mind, because I've had that happen before where people have come and, and it's a big thing. They're like, we're coming into the church, but then Father so-and-so is like, you have to get your marriage blessed. But it's like, but we were, like, what happened? We were previously married. We were fine. We were, and it's like, well, I've actually had to say no, that they don't have to get their marriage blessed. Now, if one of them, like I said, if we get that, we do the convalidation stuff whenever there was one who was Catholic, and he needs to get that convalidation because of his Catholic bond. But if they both were Protestant, it's recognized. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, if a person needs an annulment, the process should begin immediately, okay? Why do I say that? One, because it's uncertain how long these things will take. Second of all, what I've experienced so many times with so many people, the second you start telling them words like annulment, getting marriage blessed, the defensive wall goes up, and you have just brought up lots and lots and lots of broken memories, of hurt from their past, things they thought that they hid underneath the rug, and now they're in a happy marriage. And they don't want to deal with those things. And sometimes that takes a long time just to counsel people through, to walk with them through. Don't think it's just okay, you need an annulment. Okay, slip that in. Okay, here's your little card back. No. You're always going to be dealing with a lot of stuff. You're going to have some people that are going to even step away from the church because of this. But how you handle it, how you talk to them, how you journey with them can make a lot of difference. So that's why I say take your time, but start it early, because there's a lot of things that you need to work through. Some people, they'll say like, yeah, the tribunal, that the annulment process is a ministry of the tribunal. I don't say that. I never say that. Why? I can say it's ministerial, but second, and primarily, there's a lot of people who come to that, sometimes even leave with that, not feeling ministered to. They don't feel ministered to. They do not feel, they feel they came through with a lot of brokenness. Because like I said, it's a judicial evaluation. It's not necessarily a sacramental giving. It's a judicial evaluation. And so yeah, for a lot of people, that's the honest truth they see it as. I'm being looked at, evaluated by the church. Be very careful when you talk about annulments with people about, oh, this is going to be healing for you. Oh, this is a ministry. No. When I talk to people when they come in for the annulments, I am very guarded with the words I use for them. Because, there are people who break down and cry. There are people who, you can visibly see them as they're talking with the annulments, the reliving pains and hurts. It's difficult for people. So I'm cautious using that words. I invite y'all to do that as well. Be gentle with these people, but that's why I say start it early, to give them that time. And don't give them any sense of, we can get this done by whenever, because truth of the matter is you don't know. You don't know. So the next thing, if someone, after annulment and all this, if someone needs a convalidation or sanation, the process can take place at a convenient time when all necessary people can be present, but still before reception into the church. So if all you're dealing with is convalidating or doing a sanation, like I said, that can kind of happen a little more sort of, because for convalidation, they still need witnesses and things like that. That can happen whenever that's most convenient to take place, but it still needs to happen before they're received into the church. Here's another thing. If a Catholic was married outside the church, all that's needed before the bless, and I just use that buzzword right there, but I use it just to cover sanation or convalidation. All that needs before the convalidation or sanation of the new marriage is an in-parish investigation. Essentially what that means is, so you got a Catholic or two Catholics, and they're like, we did the destination marriage, we were married on the beach, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Your pastor can handle that. All he needs to do is pull up the right paperwork, show Sally's baptismal certificate, show the marriage license that says, on the beach with, Dustin Hoffman as presider or whatever, whatever. And it's like, okay, ergo, that's invalid. So we don't need an annulment because that's already proof enough. So that can happen in the parish. Another thing, and I'll mention this, and I'll say this just because I feel it needs to be said. Just because if someone is only divorced, they don't need an annulment before they can start receiving the sacraments. If all that is they were just divorced, but they haven't remarried, they don't need an annulment before they can start receiving the sacraments. I know people who, in good faith, they were told by a priest or someone, they said, I got a divorce and I haven't received communion for 12 years. All because someone told them, oh, you're divorced, you can't receive communion. If someone is simply divorced, they can receive communion. They're called again to live chastely, but just the separation, like I said, it doesn't do anything to the marriage. So there is no further thing that's preventing them. As long as they're not engaged in anything, they're not married, if they're just divorced, they can receive communion, they can go participate in the sacraments. But that's where the buck stops. Okay, so just keep that there. So yeah, I just needed to say that, because I feel like it's something that I hear from time to time that people misinform people about. What to expect in the annulment process. So this is also like, okay, when you're talking to people about doing an annulment, what's coming up? So people need to fill out the basic data form to begin the process. You can find this on the diocese website. If you can't, let me know. It's a basic form that needs to be filled out about personal information of their spouse, where marriage took place, stuff like that. Here's another important thing. If someone was previously married more than once, they need to fill out a basic data form for each marriage, okay? Like they need to fill one out for each of those marriages. Because sometimes they'll fill out one form and they'll just, like on the back page, be like, oh, by the way, I was also married to da-da-da and da-da-da and da-da-da. Well, okay, when we have that one basic data form, we're just working under that for that one person. We need one for each of those. So we have all the information on all of that. They need to have baptismal certificates, if applicable. And they need marriage license and a divorce decree. Okay? Because all that proves that, yes, okay, like we said, there's the presumption that a marriage took place. They're clearly not living together. Ergo, this is where we're at with them. They will need to offer character witnesses, which are just people who can write and say, if you've done anything with juries and stuff like that, it's just someone who can say, I know this person is truthful and will give honesty. So they need at least two people who can just write a short character reference. Sometimes we already have that written out and just someone signs it. From the time the initial documents are submitted, so the first time we get those basic data forms, that baptismal and stuff, it'll be roughly 30 days before a hearing is scheduled. Okay, keep that in mind. Even if you have all your ducks in the row, you're still looking about 30 days before they actually get scheduled a hearing. Why? Because there's 15 days that have to be given for the other spouse to have a right of defense. One of the things the church holds is, again, if this marriage is considered valid, both parties have a right to look at and say that marriage was valid. So ergo, even if Jenny was previously married, she doesn't want anything to do with him, she wants to just live her new happy marriage, we still have to give, Bubba, whatever, we still have to give him the right to say, hey, your marriage is being looked at for an annulment, you have a right of defense and everything. So there's 15 days that has to be given where we send that out, wait for at least some response from that person. And then, like I said, if they don't reply after 15 days, there's a second attempt that's made. So it's about 30 days roughly altogether. Also, the other thing is if you in any way get a hint that their former spouse they have a good relationship with, it's very encouraged to try and get them on board to help with this. I would say 90% of the cases, the former spouse, it was, like I said, it was a bad, broken thing. It was broken. But I've had several, actually, this past year, I have several, where the person's in there and like, yeah, me and my former spouse, we're actually good friends. We still talk and everything. And I'm like, why didn't they choose to participate? And he's just like, And it's like, we actually ended up having to go in and ask that former spouse to participate just because of the grounds and everything. But basically, if they can, that is so much more helpful because now you have both people that are able to give declarations on the status of their marriage and everything like that. So the respondent must be informed by the tribunal and everything. What to expect? They will receive a call or an email scheduling a time when they can come in for their hearing after that 30 days and everything. This hearing will be based on their availability as well as the judge. Okay, so here's the thing, and this happens so many times, and especially those of you who help with OCIA, don't think that if Easter is April 2nd, that on March 30th, you can drop that little paper off of the tribunal and, we're going to get them in time. I'm sorry, we're human. I can't, we can't pull rabbits out of hats and stuff like that. We need time to make good judgments and everything. then they will be recommended to find a witness they knew at least at the time, if not before the wedding, to help verify statements and grounds. Okay, so again, a witness who can also add to their testimony and everything. I'm going to find some of these terms in a little bit. After the hearing, there will be a period of review and discernment on the part of the judges, the opportunity of the defender of the bond to make statements in favor of the marriage, and then a final decision. There is someone in the tribunal called the defender of the bond, who his whole role is to keep that premise that until proven otherwise, marriage is valid. So he is always arguing, as literally the devil's advocate, why we think that this marriage might still be valid. Okay, you say this, well, that's not enough. Like, what comes up a lot? Oh, they were too young. They didn't know what they were doing. Okay, defender of the bond is going to say, people naturally have a right to marry. Canon law says, this is surprising, canon law says by the age of 14, anyone is mature enough to get married. Okay? Yeah, no. This is...
Dr. Hyatt, 25.
Yeah. I won't go into that, but basically it deals with the fact that once people are able to physically, procreate, that's kind of the time we say, okay, they can start thinking and preparing for that reality. Now, the church does say that if they are that age, they have to get specific permission, for that to happen. And I don't think I've ever seen that happen. But it does. Mary was very young too. We believe Mary was a maiden, very, very young, probably 15, 16. So if you're going to say, oh no, it couldn't happen, well, be very careful what you start talking about with Mary and Joseph. Then we hold that their marriage was absolutely valid and stuff. Yes, and then after that, at the end of it, a letter will be sent to the person giving them their final decision and the next steps. So I say this in this way of final decision and next steps. Why? And this happens so many times. An annulment is not a Catholic divorce. Okay? There is not 100% certainty that someone coming in for an annulment is going to get their little annulment sticker at the end. They're going to get that gold seal and everything. That's not going to be a given. Like I said, first and foremost, we hold that principle that these people walk in, and until proven to the contrary, this marriage is presumed as valid. Okay? So me as a judge, I have to get to what's called moral certitude. When they're presenting, when them and their witnesses are talking about this, they have to give me enough certitude that I can say, you know what, there's enough evidence here that they lacked some kind of essential element or something like that. Because essentially what an annulment is saying is it's not saying, okay, well, we just come in and we just give a Catholic divorce. No, what we're saying is there was not a marriage in the first place. Okay, there was not a marriage in the first place because they lacked some essential elements. There was something that was barring the bonding in their minds or something like that. Something that prevented an actual marriage from taking place. So this is what we talk about. They are based on grounds or typical faults the church has recognized that can be the causative force of the natural right of marriage to not take place. All these must exist before or at the time of contracting a marriage. So we hear this a lot. Danny, 5 years into the marriage, became an alcoholic and became abusive. I'm so sorry, but that happened after the contracting of the bond. That has no bearing on the fact that the time of their marriage. That's not something that we can look at. It's not something we look at. It's unfortunate, and a lot of times people bring that up, but it's not what we look at. Okay, the grounds all have to look at the time of the marriage, was there something essential being missed? Now, when we talk about the young, the immaturity, what we do run into a lot of is unfortunately, a lot of people who have broken lives, broken families. And they want to get out of that. They find some escape, some way they can get out of it. How do they get out of it? Ding, I get married. And that's my knight in shining armor that takes me out of this hellhole of whatever I'm in and gets me into a new life. Okay? And that's why some of these young people, they jump into those marriages really, really quick. I'm not going to go into all those examples or anything, but that does happen a lot. Those are some of the grounds that we can look at. But at the same time, it's not a given. It's still not a given. There's nothing there's none of these things that are just absolutely it's a given. They still have to all be looked at because that presumption of law. Not every case is guaranteed to get an annulment, like I said. Remember, it is an investigation, and marriage holds the presumption of the law. When in doubt, the marriage is valid. So until then, and I've given what we call negatives. And negatives means from what I've seen, from what I've observed, I can't see that there was enough force to say that marriage was invalid. So I give a negative. And it's painful because it means, all right, that person doesn't get an annulment. They have to either restart or, whatever, they move forward or something. But that's one of the things is it's not a given. It's not a given. I try to caution people with that. It's not going to be a given. They're going to get an annulment. So that's why I also tell you when you walk with people, don't just make it seem like it's a slot machine type process and everything. Be very gentle with people on that. So what are some fears that you would encounter? And some of this I actually deal with in those pamphlets, but these are kind of some more that I've embellished over the time. So my children will be considered illegitimate. We hear that a lot. Well, what about my kids? We had kids together, from my previous marriage. I don't want to look at the annulment because I love my kids that I had with him and stuff like that. Okay, the annulment does not look anything at all about legitimacy of children. The annulment, like I said, this is looking at that sort of sacramental bond being formed, that permanence of that bond. It doesn't say that love wasn't shared. Love, of course, was shared. Some relationship was formed. A certain bond was indeed formed. And like I said, until the annulment process has gone through, we are saying that yes, in every sense of the term, that was a valid marriage. It has everything about a marriage that you would normally have. So that's what I kind of tell people is in no way are you considering children illegitimate or even sacrificing the love and relationship you had with that person. It costs money. Everyone wants to know about money. It's completely a free process. There's no charge, and the Pope recently actually just enforced it's forbidden to charge anything from this. I get paid no more than any parish priest for doing my parish priest job and my job as working at the tribunal. We don't get a single cent more, so it's just complete. That's why I say it is ministerial, because it is something that we're not doing for profit. But I still am very cautious saying it's a ministry because it's for a lot of people it's not. It takes a long time. Okay, this is kind of caveated. It can take a few months, but we work to be as efficient in getting a just sentence out. To get a just sentence out, though, sometimes that does take extra time. Sometimes we have to look and find documents. Sometimes we have to just kind of peruse through what they've said to say, okay, is there something in this that proves at the time they gave their vows, their consent, that something was lacking? That takes time. And that's why I also say, please don't wait, because we know this takes so long on their part. Don't wait until Lent is starting, they're coming to the church, let's go through that normal process thing. Please start early. For our sake too, so we can give a just sentence, be just for y'all, just for us. Here's a big one I've encountered too. I will be blamed for a mistake I made in the past. This happens a lot, where it's they're in a happy marriage together. Jimmy, he's been a Catholic his whole life. He married Sarah, with justice of the peace. Well, they come in, they want to get their marriage blessed. Well, Sarah, who's a Protestant, she had a previous marriage. So you're saying, okay, Jimmy can't receive communion until you get marriage blessed, until you get your annulment. She feels blamed. She feels she's taking all the blame. She's taking all the guilt. Okay, and this is, like I said, this is a hard hurdle also to get over. But no questions of culpability or blame are made. We are simply working under the premise that, like we said, a marriage took place, a bond is there. We need to look at the kind of infrastructure of that bond and see did that happen? Is that there? Yada yada, all those things. But it's still a hard bullet to dodge. That people are going to feel like I'm being blamed. But yes, that's what we try to tell them is we're not playing a blame game. We're not pointing. We're not digging into things more than we need to. And here's another big one, and this is the one I just try to talk a lot about. My former spouse is dangerous. Okay, we actually run into this far more than you would actually think. My former spouse is dangerous. I don't want him to know anything about me. I don't want him to hear that I'm asking for this annulment, because he's gonna turn my children against me. He's gonna bring me to court for something. Yada yada, all these things. This is one, like I said, it takes time to kind of work through. A couple things that we can assure people. First of all, when that respondent receives that form about the annulment, the first thing is that it comes from the tribunal. Okay, we're not asking you to send your former spouse a letter saying, "Hey, I'm getting this thing annulled. Let's bury this hatchet." No. We're sending all that information, so it comes from us. They do receive a copy of that basic data form, but if the people let us know that, hey, this person's really dangerous, we don't want them knowing about us, we will white out personal contact information. But they have to know who is the person. What marriage they're dealing with and everything. So they have to be informed at least of that much. Another thing I didn't put in here, but an annulment has no civil bearing. Okay, like when someone goes through an annulment, this is not something that is used to gain custody of children. This is not something that's used to, get that property that I lost. No, you cannot and will not use it. Separation of church and state. I'm not going all into that, but this is in no way for that kind of gain. And and that has happened before, if it's ever like there's still a child custody case going on, we have to say, y'all have to finish that first before the annulment. Because if that ever comes up, we put an absolute pause on the annulment process and say, we have to stop, you have to finish that. Because this annulment process has no bearing on that. Unfortunately, though, it does spark a lot of, like I said, emotions and everything with that. So that's my presentation. I want to just end with a prayer. I know we've talked about a lot of just bad stuff. I want to end with a prayer. But this is the prayer. This is the marriage blessing that's done during the nuptial mass. And it's very beautiful. It's in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, who by your mighty power created all things out of nothing, when you had set in place the beginnings of the universe, you formed man and woman in your own image, making the woman an inseparable helpmate to the man, that they might be no longer two, but one flesh, and taught that what you were pleased to make one must never be divided. O God, who consecrated the bond of marriage by so great a mystery that in the wedding covenant you foreshadowed the sacrament of Christ and His church. O God, by whom woman is joined to man, and the companionship they had in the beginning is endowed with the one blessing, not forfeited by original sin, nor washed away by the flood. Bless all marriages and those who are struggling with broken marriages. May families continue to find in you the image and inspiration of all marriage and the source of love. For you are love itself. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. That last part I added, that the marriage blessing is actually much longer. I don't know if I have time for any questions. Probably not. Okay. But if people do have questions, you can ask me. How much overtime did I go? I figure I did. Actually, 1 minute. Only 1 minute. You give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes for questions. Okay, 5 minutes for questions. See? Yes, ma'am.
I'm not. The convalidation versus the
Sanation.
Mm-hmm. Difference. Like I'm not.
Yeah. So, like I said, give me your glass. Just give it. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, a sanation is whenever. Okay, these two Catholics, they're planning to get married outside the church. Church put a little divider in here. And so when they poured their drinks in there, it didn't mix. The convalidation, the sanation is them coming in, pulling that divider out, their drink mixed. That's all that's all the sanation will do. Okay, it will only make a marriage that is invalid because they were married outside the church, it will make it valid. It's the only thing it will do. Convalidation, it will cover everything, because in a convalidation, they are giving vows again, they have witnesses present, they have a minister present, they are essentially contracting marriage. And they have to sign a promise that they are giving their vows new and fresh as if they never gave it again. That's the preferred, because, like I said, maybe they were two Catholics, they were married on the beach by Dustin Hoffman, whatever. Okay, well, we can go in and we can pull that out and we can remove, that kind of invalidating clause. But I can't guarantee that Dustin Hoffman didn't make his own vows, or that they were, girl was like, I'm young, I don't really want kids. Or, if this thing really does go south, I'm going to get divorced. Or, daddy's sitting on that rocking chair with that shotgun and like, okay, if he doesn't say those words, I got him in my sights. It won't replace their vows. The convalidation will. It will cover everything. So, like I said, here's your drink back, by the way. It's fully mixed. So the convalidation will cover everything. The sanation will only cover if they were married outside the church. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So if you, as like a catechist, have a child that comes to you and has questions about their parents, I cannot give them this presentation. No.
Yeah.
So what do I tell them?
Yeah. So when a kid comes and says like, my mom and dad can't receive communion, or whatever, dad, something like that. The way we talk to kids about that is we'll say things like, first of all, I'd always say, okay, well, have your parents talk to the priest, or they're talking to the priest. But I always say, the words I like to use that are good words is just like, there may have been something imperfect in your parents' marriage. The church needs to try and make perfect. Or, there's something that the church is trying to bring to kind of a better place. Those are kind of some words I would use with kids, even sometimes with people, older people. But yeah, it's a hard thing. I would always, if you find that and you have a kid saying that, I would not be afraid to talk to the parent. Because if the kid's talking about it, I first of all think the parent has a right to hear that, hey, Sally brought this up. Is there something more to that? So I would always try to go to the parents. Because, the kids, unfortunately, again, they are part of this marriage. They're part of this situation. And so you minister to them as best you can. Like I said, you would, obviously they're not barred from any of the sacraments. But I would just explain, that, sometimes people, they need to get things corrected in their marriages, and maybe your parents haven't done that yet. And that's why I'd say, have they talked to the priest? We can help them with that, or something like that. It's kind of just where you have to use that creativity of sort of talking to them about. Because I wouldn't go through all this, because like I said, some situations like a sanation, its very gear is so that it's like, okay, we don't have to like pull all this stuff out in the public. We don't have to let little Sally see mommy and daddy going to the church professing vows again and being like, I thought they were married so long ago. It can be done sort of on a more kind of equinamical level. That was a big word I just threw out there. I don't think it makes sense. But does that kind of help? Does that make sense a little bit? Yeah. I saw another hand or another hands. Yes, sir.
What if you have two non-Catholics that marry outside of the church and they join the church and later get divorced? Do they have to get an annulment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the thing is, like I said, that's one of those things of like, that's the same thing of why we would ask if Jimmy, he's married to Sarah. She's a Catholic. He's not, but he was married beforehand, and the person he was married to was a Baptist. They were married in a Baptist church. Well, that needs to be annulled because in the Baptist church that was valid. So if they were Baptist beforehand, they become Catholic, it goes south. That again, barring that they would want to get married and everything, that would need to be annulled. Now, one thing that, and this is why this chart's helpful. If Sarah is married to Jimmy he's a Protestant. He's wanting into the church, but he was previously married before. Always ask the question: was his previous spouse Catholic? Because that's your get out of jail card. If he got, seriously, I've had that before, where it's like they send paperwork in the tribunal, and it's like Jimmy, he's petitioning a marriage, but his former spouse was a Catholic. They got married on the beach. Ergo, that was invalid. And it wasn't just invalid for her, it was invalid for him too, because you can't have the marriage is invalid just for her and not for him. But yeah, so if they were married, like I said, once that marriage happens, it's indissoluble. So if they become Catholic, whatever, then that stays. So they would need, like I said, if they get divorced, okay, well then you just say until they want to seek a marriage, they don't need annulment. If they just get divorced and want to live the rest of their life chastely, then they're fine to keep going to the sacraments and everything. So, yes, ma'am.
So that, bringing that up, if a marriage, say for instance, two Catholics were annulled or whatever, and then one wanted to get remarried, and you gave it, for instance, okay, they want to get married in the church, but one was staying like a Protestant of religion, and the Catholic is staying the Catholic religion. Of course, you have to bring your children up as Catholics, and you have to validate that. But what about the Protestant? Do they get to stay in the church, in their own church, or how does that work?
I'm confused with what you're saying. So, like,
Okay. A Catholic marrying a non-Catholic.
okay,
They
get married.
get married, but the Catholic, say the Catholic is a female, she wants to stay Catholic. They
I'm just
agree,
keeping this in mind.
that he wants to, or she wants to get married in the church. The non-Catholic, who is another religion, wants to stay in their church. How does that work
As far as raising the children, okay, yeah.
Yes.
So that's one of the things, like I said with that mixed marriage form, that's one of the things that when you're doing marriage prep, that has to be covered, that has to be gone over, of like, the Catholic has an obligation to be married in the church and to raise their children Catholic. The other person does not have to convert, but they can't forbid that other party from raising the kids Catholic. And that's something that I've had that happen before, where it's like, this girl Catholic, she was marrying a guy who wasn't Catholic, and they wanted, get their marriage blessed, all this stuff. And I was talking, I said, okay, blah, blah, blah. I was like, but, you're going to have to sign a form that says you are going to remain Catholic and you're going to raise your kids Catholic. And she said, I can't do that. She says, I can't do that because I can't guarantee he's going to be on board with that. And I say, I'm sorry, then I can't bless this marriage, because I can't bless this knowing you're not going to raise these kids Catholic. I couldn't do it. Well, actually, it was dealing with a dispensation, but anyways, it was a similar thing. So yeah, as long as the other party is not prohibiting, is not forbidding it, they're not obliged. But honestly, that's why for the longest time in the church did have such strict regulations of mixed marriages. The church has now become a little more lenient, but it's still like any time you got girl Catholic, guy not Catholic, he doesn't want to convert, they want to get married in the church, you have to do a mixed marriage. And our diocese actually is one of the only dioceses that can happen in parish. A lot of dioceses, if she's Catholic, he's not Catholic, that actually has to come from the bishop. He has to give permission for that mixed marriage. But in our diocese, that can happen locally in the parish. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Does anyone else? It's a quick one. Quick.
I'll be quick.
Yeah.
If you have received your sacraments, like say you're 18, but you haven't been confirmed, but you're wanting to be married in the church, do you need to be confirmed before you can receive the sacrament of marriage?
Generally, what the church says is yes. That's in the canon law. Generally, what they say is like someone who is not confirmed should be confirmed before they get married. But at the same time, looking at salvation of souls, the greater good, we have to look at and say, how can that happen in a timely way within all of this? But generally, like I said, a lot of times we do, especially if they're in a marriage now, like we said, we have to regularize their marriage before they can get confirmed and stuff. So, but if it's like they're just preparing for marriage and everything, the ideal is that they can get confirmed before marriage, because obviously the sacrament of confirmation is the fulfilling of the baptismal vows for marriage and stuff like that.
So if they've already married and now they're like, do they need to be convalidated or senated before they make their confirmation?
Are they, so tell me everything.
It's not a valid marriage. Well, it's not valid because it was justice of the peace. So do they need to
So always get the marriage regularized first
and then be confirmed?
Before, in that case. Okay. Yeah, because if there was a marriage that wasn't perfect. That that has to get corrected first before baptism or any of the other sacraments. That's also why technically, even in the OCIA process, if they're a Protestant coming in, we still need to get their marriage stuff done before they can. Because remember, I mean, Protestants who are received into the church, they're technically just receiving First Communion and confirmation. So they're in the same boat. That's why they would need to receive annulment, blessing of marriage, before getting confirmation.
Thank
So, you're welcome. All right, I think I've maxed out my time. So thank y'all for having me and for